Okay, here we go. That would have been bad if I couldn't record. And oh, and Doug sent me the link to the podcast neuroplasticity that we were talking about yesterday. So I will send that in the email with the link for the recording. So you're going to get 2 links for the price of 1. There you go. All right. Hi, everybody. Any new business before we get started? We're Franktified. Good to see you, Frank.
Hello.
Yeah. All right. No new or old business we got to take care of before we dive into page 19 then. Page 19. So last Bat Time and Bat Channel, we were just starting the chapter on the hero and the heroine's journey. And we're only a couple pages into that. And one of the first things we did was kind of go through the hero's journey itself and we only got through part of it, although we kind of talked about the whole process. But I thought what we do is go back a little bit and just make sure we understand each of these steps, because the hero's journey is really important as a map, as a general map, a placeholder about the shape and the milestones along the way. At the very beginning of page 18, actually, he says, the pattern of the heroic journey is rather consistent and really matches my own research on initiation. Those embarking on this journey invariably go through the following stages in one form or another. When he talks about initiation, what he's typically talking about are rites of passage, but we don't really understand rites of passage anymore, especially in this country where we really don't even have any rites of passage anymore. We'll sometimes talk about a child losing its first tooth as a rite of passage, or a girl going, to her prom or a quinceañera as a rite of passage. But that is a milestone, but it's not a rite of passage in the classic sense. A rite of passage has 3 parts to it. The first part is separation, then transition, and then reincorporation. And so the idea here is that the young person who's being initiated, and this is typically for boys because women and girls have their own built-in rites of passage, but boys need to be separated from the village, from the world of the women and the children, and taken out into the wild, into the bush. And there is usually some sort of initiation rite that would have to do with some kind of cutting or some kind of painful procedure that goes on, tattooing, something like that. And so the separation is that the young boy is separated from everything that he knows about life thus far. And then after the ceremony, he's sent out, in the case of the Aboriginal walkabouts, he's sent out into the bush for up to 6 months, where he has to live by his own wits and what he's learned thus far in life, and then survive and then come back. And when he comes back, he's reincorporated back into the village, but now he's got to change status. Now he's actually a man, and the tribe looks at him that way instead of the child that he was. So separation, transition, and reincorporation. And if you think about that, then you've got the same basic parts, the skeleton of the hero's journey, which is going to have more detail to it, more moving pieces, but basically it's the same story. There's separation from the world that we know. There's a transition. There are tasks that are given to us that we need to perform. And then we come back to where we started. We reincorporate. But now we are changed from the inside out, and we have something to offer. We have something we can give back. So the way he breaks it down here in these 5 stages, number 1, these people who are about to go on a journey live in a world that they presently take as given and sufficient. They're often a prince or a princess, and if not, sometimes even of divine origin, which of course they know nothing about. And so this idea that we've been talking about, that everything we need is already within, our ideal us, our ideal person, that kingdom person is standing within us as if frozen in a block of ice. And so we just need to remove everything that is not that ideal person. So everything is already there. We are of divine origin. We are made in God's image. Number 2, they have a call or the courage to leave home for an adventure of some type. Not really to solve any problem, but just to go out and beyond their present comfort zone. And so at this point, the traveler, the journeyer doesn't know what the task is going to be, but they know that they're being called out, either internally because of their own dissatisfaction. We were just talking about divine dissatisfaction and blessed unrest a while back, or because something is calling them out. And maybe in a painful way. Maybe there's been a wounding, a loss, some kind of conflict that pushes them out of their comfort zone, pushes them out of the world that they have known. Or it may be an interior call, as it is with Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz, where she's just yearning for something over the rainbow. Number 3, on this journey or adventure, they in fact find their real problem. They're almost always wounded in some way and encounter a major dilemma. And the whole story largely pivots around the resolution of the trials that result. And there's always a wounding. Okay, so when they get out into this new world, as soon as Dorothy opens the door and everything goes color in Oz, and now she's confronted with munchkins and witches and magic and all sorts of things that she doesn't understand, but she's also given someone who can help her. And these guides, these helpmates are also part of the hero's journey. And they appear and they will not only give advice, but they'll give some sort of tool, some sort of implement that the hero or the heroine can use to help them along their way. And of course, the first thing that Dorothy gets are the ruby slippers, which is really what all she needs, but she doesn't know that until the very end, right? But Glinda, the good witch, is there to help her. And invariably, there's some kind of guide or some kind of helper that comes along the way. Just as if you think about it in life, when you stepped out of your comfort zone, invariably there are people there who end up helping you if you're willing to listen. Number 4. Actually, let's read this first paragraph, full paragraph on 19. In this number 3, when they find out what their real problem is, their world is opened up, the screen becomes much larger, and they do too. Our very word Odyssey is now used to describe these kinds of discoveries and adventures. And so the world is opened up from the narrow problems that we faced either as children or in our world, our familiar world, within our own comfort zone. We suddenly are opened up to a much larger vantage and problems that eclipse and make the problems that we were facing before seem small in comparison. And
so
then
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
In the transition, you say, oh, the boys live by their wits to survive. What if they cannot survive? Or do they all survive? Or are they helpers to help them? Because not all boys are street smart, right? Not all children are street smart.
Well, in the case of the Aborigines, they have what they call their song lines. And I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, but they are chants. We would hear them as a chant, but they're actually songs where they embed their culture and all of their spirituality and their cultural knowledge into these songs that are recited over and over again from the children's smallest ages at night around the campfires, and they are memorized. And what the Aborigines and many Aboriginal cultures have created is a portable culture and spirituality, because they're nomadic. They don't write, they don't carve in stone, they don't have agriculture. They just move with herds or move with the seasons and the food sources. And so everything is portable for them. And so these young boys have been inculcated in this culture, and embedded in those song lines are all of the information about the land around them that they're going to need, including where the water sources are, including where there's game, including how you care for a wound, and what natural, plants and leaves that you can use. And so these are the tools of their survival. And if the boys have learned these tools, then they'll survive, but not all of them do. Some of them don't come back from their walkabout. Some of them travel sometimes hundreds or even thousands of kilometers in their walkabout. And it's amazing. The white men white men and women who discovered Australia from the West, and were just amazed at the Aboriginal ability, without any kind of navigational aids, to be able to unerringly navigate, hundreds and thousands of kilometers of bush, just trackless desert, through these song lines. But you're right, Ellen, not all of them do survive. And if they don't, then they don't. But if they do, then they become, honored within the tribe as they are reincorporated into it.
I was just wondering from the clinical standpoint, because, we have some kids with Down syndrome, some kids with mental handicap. I wonder if they're given exceptions and they'll be like children forever, right? Maybe.
What you're talking about in these Aboriginal cultures?
Yeah, or whatever society has.
Well, it's going to sound harsh to us, but those kids are not really allowed to live.
Oh,
If they were not able to do what they need to do, then, you hear about the stories of the Spartans back in classical Greece, right? If the child was imperfect, they would just throw it off the cliff. But it sounds so harsh to us and so inhumane. But this is one way of keeping the tribe strong and allowing the tribe to survive. We now, with the aid of technology, are able to keep people alive that just died before. And so it's a whole different way of looking at life. The elderly, as soon as they couldn't contribute back to the tribe, would take their own walkabout and voluntarily give up their lives for the good of the tribe. So it was a very different way of living a collective life rather than the kind of individual emphasis that we have in Western life. So the journeyer here is getting his or her world opened up in a way that staying home just isn't going to do. If you think of the Lord of the Rings and you think of Frodo or Bilbo, in their comfortable shire, and living their little insulated life, and then they go off on this journey, and it just opens up their world in a way that they didn't and couldn't have possibly imagined. And this is what the hero's journey does. This is what the transition from childhood into adulthood does. The problems of the child that are so huge to the child become dwarfed by the tasks and the responsibilities and the problems that are faced in the world of the adult. And so the hero's journey and rites of passage are mirroring that and giving us a shape and a form to that journey, and also letting us know where we are along the way, which is really important for us. Number 4, the first task which the hero or heroine thinks is the only task is only the vehicle and warm-up act to get him or her to the real task. He or she falls through what is merely his or her life situation to discover his or her real life, which is always a much deeper river hidden beneath the appearances. Most people confuse their life situation with their actual life, which is an underlying flow beneath the everyday details. This deeper discovery is largely what religious people mean by finding their soul. So what Rohr has talked about this before is the task within the task. So as we embark upon the hero's journey, there are tasks that we are tasked with. And we think those are the real tasks and the only tasks, but really they are, they're kind of exercises for us to go through that will reveal the deeper task within. And if we're talking about finding our soul, we're also talking about finding our true self, which we have talked about in here, as opposed to the egoic self, that deeper self, and what that deeper self entails. In Dorothy's situation, she meets her traveling companions, Scarecrow, Tin Woodman, and the Lion. And in the story, they appear as separate characters, but in truth, what they represent is her own true self. They're representing her own fortitude, her own intelligence, her own compassion. And that is being grown. So as those characters grow, we're seeing her growing herself from the inside out through the completion of her tasks and where she's going within her journey. And so that opening up is also an opening up within as well as an opening up without. So it's a realization of a wider world and the greater problems and the greater connections that are available. And then it's an opening within and a growing within and a realization of who we really are that can actually address that greater life, that greater world, and those greater tasks at the same time. So an opening up of awareness, and then and opening up of the realization of who we really are. And then finally, the hero or heroine then returns to where he or she started and knows the place for the first time, as T.S. Eliot puts it, but now with a gift or boon for his people or her village. As the last step of Alcoholics Anonymous says, a person must pass the lessons learned on to others, or there has been no real gift at all. The hero's journey is always an experience of an excess of life, a surplus of energy, with plenty left over for others. And that's a real key line there. The hero's journey is always an experience of an excess of life, a surplus of energy, with plenty left over for others. The hero or heroine has found eros, or life energy, and it is more than enough to undo thanatos, the energy of death. Jesus calls this the abundant life, right? He says, I came to bring life and life abundantly. It's not about just skating through with fists clenched and teeth gritted, but it is overflow. It's abundance. And this is where Jesus is pointing, as he's pointing us and calling us out on our own hero's journey as well. If it is authentic life energy, it is always experienced as a surplus or an abundance of life. The hero or heroine is by definition a generative person, to use Erik Erikson's fine term, concerned about the next generation and not just himself or herself. The hero lives in deep time and not just in his or her own small time. In fact, I would wonder if you could be a hero or heroine if you did not live in what many call deep time. That is past, present, and future all at once. And this completely aligns with the Aboriginal idea of dream time, which is sometimes called every when. And it's the idea of, just as he says, past, present, and future all together. It's time as a single moment, time as a singularity, experiencing everything all at once, experiencing the past and the present and the future. And the Aborigines consider dream time to be the real and authentic description of the universe, the way the universe really works. And our experience of time as linear, as a segment between a beginning and an end, is the illusion. And then interestingly enough, we in the West flip that and say linear time, our experience of time as a segment, is the real definition of the universe. And dream time is the illusion or the metaphor. And the Aborigines have it the other way around. And I think they've got it right. That what the mystic and the contemplative is tapping into is this deep time, this dream time, this every when. And that experience of the single moment of eternity is the reality. But our egoic minds experience that as a linear segment between birth and death, or point A and point B. But really, when we get outside of all of that, when we can step aside from our egoic consciousness, then we can access this dream time or deep time. And that's where true meaning and purpose and abundant life really comes from, along with a sense of identity, who we really are. All right, that was me being very long-winded. In the meantime, Julie and Lindy have shown up, so good to see you two from Nashville and Montana. My gosh, we're just so eclectic here. Lindy, what city are you in?
It's Kalispell, is that what it's called? It's
Yeah,
not
okay.
far from Eureka, very north, closer to Canada.
I am not familiar with those little places.
Me too, that's why I'm just trying to repeat what they tell me.
Yeah, if it's not Billings or Bozeman or Helena or Missoula, I'm lost.
No,
That's it. That's all I know. Well,
yeah.
it's good to see you, dear. Thanks for dropping in. And you
Glad
too,
I
Julie.
could.
Fantastic. Okay, so I just went through all of that stuff in a heartbeat. Any thoughts or questions or comments on any of that? Is the shape of the hero's journey starting to make some sense, at least?
Mhm.
Dave, well, a couple of things. One thought is based on Ellen's earlier comment about, like I was thinking of people, like one of my clients has a kid with muscular dystrophy. No, multiple sclerosis, that's what it is. and essentially he's going to be restricted to a wheelchair, restricted to, limited physical functioning, some mental delays and things of that nature. And I was wondering what a hero's journey would look like for somebody like that. And I was fantasizing that because he's physically restricted in this way, he might be forced to do this intellectual, I don't know if intellectual is the right word, but this finding of the soul thing that he talked about in the fourth step. I was just wondering, my thinking is that because he would have less of an ego, right, in terms of his whatever, that might give him a leg up in some way. I don't know.
It's interesting you say that. That's exactly the way that I've thought of it as well, especially when it comes to Down syndrome. Because if you've met any Down syndrome kids or had anything to do with them, and not just kids, but adults, they are just exactly what you're expressing here. Kind of egoless, childlike, usually just happy and blissful and excited about everything that's around them. And I think you're onto something there. What I didn't spend a lot of time with is girls, because boys need a formal ritual because they don't have biology working for them, or the way that societies typically work that gives girls natural rites of passage and a natural hero's journey. In most ancient cultures, it was the girls that moved from their home to the home of their groom, who stayed with the house of their father. And so it was the girls who automatically, you can see, as soon as they were of age at 12 or 13 and could now bear children, they were married off, because in subsistence cultures, you needed polygamy. You needed a lot of wives producing as many children as possible through childbearing years to make sure that enough survived, that the tribe could survive. And it was the girl who had to move from her home to the home of her groom. And so there is a separation, the transition, and the reincorporation automatically built in. Childbirth itself is another rite of passage. And so it was kind of built into the cake that women and girls had these natural, organic rites of passage. And if you think about it, the real hero's journey is interior. It can be mated with an exterior journey, but it doesn't have to be. And so these children that you're talking about, William, whether it's muscular dystrophy or Down syndrome, they're taking an interior journey that we can only guess at because of the privation, because of what they're going through. Just as the girls, with what they were going through, took their interior journey in a different way than the males had to. And so it's not so much, and this is one thing that we're going to talk about as we get further into this chapter, where I kind of diverge a bit, possibly with Rohr, is because he's focusing so much on the exterior journey, and that's more or less a detail. It doesn't have to be an exterior journey. We don't have to leave our homes, but we have to leave our sense of what we are clinging to. That's the real piece. And for many of us, it's hard to do one without the other. But I think for some of these kids with these physical issues, or maybe traumatic issues in their home, they can take their hero's journey a lot earlier than those of us who have had it physically easier. And so I don't know how it works. None of us really know how it works. But I can imagine that these journeys are taken in different ways for different people. And we can't judge them from the outside as to whether they've had the opportunity or not.
And I'm glad you mentioned the trauma, because I was thinking about the next point he was making here, that the hero is this glad hero who is, coming back with all of this positive energy and things like that. And, I just wonder if the hero could be grumpy and bruised up and damaged.
Well, I have a line that I put in my book, that the hero is not the one who completes the journey. The hero is the one whom the journey completes. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
It's not about just completing the journey. It's about being completed by the journey. And if someone is still grumpy or irritable, what Rohr is calling here Thanatos, right? The death energy as opposed to Eros, the life energy, then they really don't have anything to offer or give back to the community. They haven't learned what the gifts are, what the boon is that creates the sense of abundant life. And so I'd say that's someone who has not yet been completed by the journey, although they've certainly been beaten up by it, right?
Mm.
Could
wonder
that,
how much oh, go ahead.
excuse me, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, you know, the spiritual guides, and maybe that's the church or whatever. You're going through the journey, and maybe all these good things are happening for you to be journeyed upon. But I'm wondering at times, if you're so close to it, sometimes it's hard to get all that perspective because you're in it. You know, well, somebody maybe alongside of you that maybe has been there, you can kind of connect the dots better.
Well, one thing, Doug, you mentioned all these good things happen to you. What's happening on the journey is not going to be experienced as a good thing. It's
I
going to
didn't mean a good thing like happy things, but the things that help you
Grow. Yeah.
grow.
okay.
So the
Okay.
pain, all these things that happen so that you are maturing and growing and becoming more enlightened, and you're sort of there and understanding that, but I also wonder how much, when you're trying to do all via self-processing, how maybe that's what this book's about, to help you recognize, you know, where you've come and maybe where you got to go. Because you do it on just by yourself, you may not be able to always have that perspective.
And I think you're exactly right. And I think that's what the strength of a book like this is, or the strength of even studying the hero's journey or rites of passage, because then we can see that this suffering that we're going through, these difficulties we're going through, have a purpose. And as long as there's meaning in the pain, then we can do it. We can get through it, and we can even see the virtue and the nobility in it. And we will persist in doing it until we get to the place where we are completed by the journey, enough that we have something to bring back to our people. But you're absolutely right, Doug. When you're inside of just the craziness of the journey and the difficulties that you're facing, you're not necessarily going to see anything more than that. And that's why my study of this, in my 30s was so important, because it gave me a shape. It gave me a map that allowed me to say, okay, even though this sucks big time, I can see where I am on this. And if I can push through, there's going to be some good that comes out of it. But yeah, it's hard to see that if you don't have, and that's what these guides and these helpers along the way are also doing. They are the ones who are continuing to give more context, more perspective, as well as tools and helps on their way through. But yeah, we need that. It's hard to do this on your own, right? Tony, we cut you off. What were you going to say, buddy?
Yeah, when William had the question about the grumpy, the grumpy hero, and you were responding to it, it made me think about the AA program. And, there's a person who's gone through AA and the steps, and they're called what's the name for them? They're called a dry drunk.
Right.
They still don't have any peace in their journey, yet they've gone through a journey. They're not drinking any longer. They have sobriety, but they're the most miserable people in the world.
Mm.
So I was just wondering if that might connect with what William was asking.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Randy could say something about that. Just from your understanding of the AA program, not that
We've
you're a
got
grumpy.
2 cents to throw against the wall. I don't think you need to read this book to understand those who have it and those who don't. If that makes sense.
It does. It
Yeah.
does.
But yeah. I guess it's not necessarily AA related. For myself, it was when I was within the church and considered vocationally being a pastor, and the lead founding pastors talking about how he was going to anoint me with a Holy Spirit for this position of leadership. And that was kind of one of the first things where I kind of pushed back. It's like, oh, okay. You're, as opposed to necessarily the Holy Spirit is with me. I think his wording was incorrect, but I think the spirit of it, again, is when you have something that's valuable to give to others, others recognize it. If that makes sense. You got to force it and try to put a bow around it and all that kind of stuff. And I know from personal experience, by trying to force it and such, it's inauthentic and it doesn't work. But when you got it, it's there, and people can smell it. Not necessarily that I just had garlic on my spaghetti.
That's a good point, Randy. And he's going to get more into that in the next few paragraphs. But just to put a finer point on it, what both Tony and even Doug were talking about here a second ago, and William too, is that I was talking to somebody, and I often talk about partnering with God. You probably heard me say that we need to partner with God. There's something for us to do. It's not passive, it's active. And he was talking about putting on the mind of Christ. And he said to him that almost sounded blasphemous, that you would put on the mind of Christ, or that you could partner with God, because God is God and who am I? And I said, that's part of the problem that we're facing here, is that we're looking at God as the king figure, way up there on the throne, the pinnacle of everything, the creator of heaven and earth. And for us to say that we're in some way putting on that mind or in some way partnering with this sounds blasphemous. But the truth of the matter is, if you are really on this journey, what you start to realize is that you don't go up to meet God, you go down to meet God. And everything that Jesus taught us about the nature of his Father was that his Father was an unassuming God, a humble God, a vulnerable God. And that was mirrored in Jesus' way of dealing with everyone else. When you finally achieve this completion of the hero or the heroine, what you find is humility. What you find is servanthood. It's a whole different trip. And so in terms of how we're approaching the journey, or how we know we're on the journey, it's as we become less and less grandiose, as we become more and more right-sized, then we can say we're really on this journey. And it makes all the difference in the world in terms of what we think of a hero or heroine. And he's going to contrast that right now with what we culturally now typically think of heroes and heroines, who really don't have anything to give back because they haven't learned this lesson yet. If they're still grumpy, if they're still a dry drunk, then they have aborted their journey at some point. They got so far and they got scared and they stopped. And it's always fear that paralyzes us. And they haven't completed it to the extent that they have taken enough of the shape of the journey to actually have something to offer anybody else. So that's another thing that was really been sticking in my head, is that we really end up going down to meet God from where we expect him to be, and it changes everything. Yeah, Julie?
I have another idea, and I think I'm digressing from our main theme, but yes, I have this romanticized view of the initiation of the boys going out to the wilderness. So I said, oh yeah, Dances with Wolves. Oh yeah, Last of the Mohicans.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lord of the Flies. And then it goes in my head. How about, yeah, because, Sandy's story about the teen boys and the tweens. And these are the boys that will do that. What do they sabotage each other, and one will not survive or not come back? Or you finish superficially. Oh, I survived, yes, but you did not have that transformation. Then what? Is that, being imperfect people, I'm sure that also happens, does it not?
Well, sure. But if you're going to contrast, a walkabout with the Lord of the Flies scenario, and certainly in the Lord of the Flies, there was separation, right? They were separated from everything they knew as they were shipwrecked on the island, but there was no transition. There was no transformation. There was nothing that was leading them down that journey Everything was about who was the strong man, who was the top of the heap. And that caste system just redeveloped along those lines within those boys, that group of boys. And so there was no transition. And so everything was arrested right after the separation. And that's all fear-based stuff.
Mm.
And there was also
it-
no guides there. There was no
Right.
wisdom.
No
there was no
guides, right.
elder who could lead them in any way.
Right. So that's what I was going to say. You need the
Yeah.
elders of the society to tell the boys, these wild boys, this is,
Yeah.
yeah, this is what we do in society. Yeah.
I always remember at the very end of the movie, you know, this one young boy is being chased by all the others who are going to kill him. And he gets out to the beach and he falls on the sand, and right in front of him, there's a pair of spotless white shoes. And the camera slowly pans up the spotless white socks and then the spotless white shorts. And then he's looking up into the face of this British officer, right? And then all the order is immediately reimposed on this group of boys. It's just amazing transition to watch. But it was absent before. There was no elder. There was no guiding principles for these boys. And that's why they couldn't make the transition. But hopefully that experience was something that also helped them to transition later on in life, those who survived. But, you know, we're looking at a different scenario here. Judy, what do you think?
Let me just, I was kind of resonating with what you were saying from a woman's perspective, you know, that has been a little bit overlooked. And I guess I want to reflect on a first world, 21st century perspective as a woman in this journey of heroine kind of going forward. And I'm very, very much thinking about my own transition and one of my daughter's transitions, you know, along the way in her heroine's journey. And I think what was similar in both mine and my youngest daughter's perspective was that we both were fortunate enough to go to college after high school. And that alone was a major transition for both of us. We both left home. I went to a college 2 states away from where I lived. Molly went from East Coast to West Coast. And she greatly desired that. That was her yearning, for adventure, and she had no idea what she was getting into, nor did I. And along the way, I think for both of us, we plummeted into, we rose into the excitement at first, and, you know, getting to know people, and, you know, brand new experience, no parents, you know, nobody to tell us what to do and all of that kind of stuff. And along the way of the work, the tasks, the routine of college, getting grades, trying to negotiate social relationships, what you do with your time, it's all up to you. And both of us had our struggles along the way, but we each had guides also. For me, I was fortunate to have a few professors that when I hit the dumps in depression and feeling overwhelmed and being in an environment where there were a lot of smart people there, and where I was, you know, kind of among the top heap of the academic world in my little high school back in Stamford, Connecticut. There were now women there that were much smarter than I was, and professors that were way beyond my experience of the world up to that point in time. And I think all of that, you know, that kind of descents and ascents and descents and ascents were guided for both of us in different ways. And my daughter was fortunate enough to come out of being the wild child in high school and discovering in her chosen college a spirituality that she never knew before. And it was a stunning transformation to me as her mom, just to witness her journey, her growth, her participation in that, and her openness to that experience. And that being said, in the 21st century, I know some of these stories look like they have a beginning and a finite end. And, I think what I'm coming to understand is that we have series of heroes and heroines' journeys based on our life events. And they do transform us, and they take us out of the comfort of the world that we do know into this, kind of a, what do you call it? Kind of a growth leap. If we choose to accept it, like Mission Impossible kind of deal, whether it's a health crisis or a divorce or a death or major upheaval of one kind or another. So, I guess I just wanted to throw that into the mix. I'm not sure that I have a question in that, but it seems as though there's just in our current day, there are multiple experiences that shape us and that transform us, and that we are never done. And you kind of don't know the next leg of the journey of the Aborigine children that come back. And do they become immediately anointed as wise ones? I don't know.
No, they're not wise yet.
No, they're not wise yet. I would imagine they'd have to grow.
And Judy, you're absolutely right. We've talked about this before. You might have missed it. We said it's more of a corkscrew or a spiral type of ascension that we're talking about here. There's one large story arc from beginning to end, from birth to death. But within that, every transition, every loss, every change can kick us into another hero's journey if we're willing to go. And what you just described, this move from college, from the home that you grew up in, suddenly going off to college, can certainly be a hero's journey. If the person actually takes the journey. Are they just partying? Are they learning nothing? Or are they actually, in the case of Molly, something changed in her? And when she came back, she was not the same girl she was when she left. When men and women go off to boot camp and then are deployed overseas in the military, absolute hero's journey, but some of them come back simply broken. Others come back learning something that is really of value. Sandy going into Northern California and into the lion's den of elementary and public school, that's a hero's journey. And if she starts to see the shape of that journey within what she's doing, it'll give her a better understanding of what she is learning and how she's moving through this. Julie and William, having moved bicoastally, Randy has now moved off. Those are all separation from the world that you knew into something completely different, where the rules are all different. That can be a hero's journey as well. So every one of these transitions that we make in life, and they're happening over and over again, the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, that's another call to a hero's journey. If we see it as such, and if we allow it to form us in new ways, but we can resist it. It can just be suffering for suffering's sake, if that's the way we choose to fight it. But if we will let it and find the guides and the helpers along the way, each one of these experiences in life can radically alter us and change us and give us so much more that we can give back.
Yep, I agree, totally.
I like what Judy was saying there about the college experience being part of the hero's journey. And it feels like that defines more of the female hero's journey today. There are more women going off to college than men. And you know, just kind of thinking about what that means for men in terms of, you know, not having a clear, identifiable rite of passage like Dave was talking about. And that's like, when I think about it, it seems like that's kind of a built-in American woman's hero's passage, you know, middle class, I guess, you know.
Very much so.
And when our culture loses its rites of passage, it's the men who are hurt the most. And that's what we're seeing right now. Yeah, there's failure to launch is rampant among young men. They aren't going to college. I think women outnumber men at college 3 to 1 or something like that.
3 to 1.
It's crazy how many more women are
Wow.
there. And it's the men who are lost to a large extent. And because there is no way for them to understand the nature of the journey, to have any milestones along the way. Why is gang participation so rampant? Because gangs have all this stuff. They have rites of passage, they have initiation, they have this strong structure that feels like life, and yet it's all so negative and dysfunctional. But at least it's something. And so that's why it's attracting so many young men, because they don't have anything else. So it's, our society is imploding in the sense that it's not giving our younger generations the ability to grow and to see their milestones and to have a way to celebrate when they have achieved these milestones in life.
I want to
Anybody have any ideas for a solution? Because I know yesterday we talked a little bit about what I'm going through with my students, and just the fact that there isn't any discipline. And, I'm teaching the way I'm being told that I'm supposed to teach by my administrator, what they want to see from me. They want the mindfulness. They want me to be positive all the time, teaching mindfulness, and I'm not allowed to raise my voice or get negative with them. And the students, like I said yesterday, have mistaken my kindness for weakness. And that's where I'm at, but really you guys are spot on. It's the middle school boys. It's not the girls, and it's so sad for the kids that do want to learn, but it is the middle school boys. What can we do to give them, what's missing is God. What's missing is Jesus. I was talking to my department people about it today, because we're teaching the students mindfulness. We're teaching them all these things that we talk about here, but the school has taken Jesus out of the equation, and that's where the power is. So they might do a little bit better. I'm sure that we can get some progress, but I think that's, the crux of the problem. But I did want to say to Judy that I loved what you said, because I was always the top of my class, top 10% of my class. And all of a sudden I get to graduate school and everybody in there is the top 10% of the class. It's a whole new deal.
So true.
Yeah, that's
Humbling.
the bar real quick. Right?
Right sizes you.
I want to add, well, Judy, with my girls going to college, I pray every day. It says, at least they go to one in the same time zone as me. Okay, that's all I want. But I was reading the devotional actually by Max Lucado, and it reminded me of Sandy's situation with these boys. Oh my gosh. So I was thinking too that yes, they are very disrespectful, and I know it's very, very difficult, but I'm thinking, going back to my high school, there's maybe 2 or 3 high school teachers that years later we remember them as the ones who influenced us. But sometimes it's not going to happen tomorrow. The realization is not there, not next week, not next month. It could happen 2 years later or 10 years later. Second, the other one I was thinking too is that there's perhaps 2 or 3 boys that are, I don't know how to label them, maybe the bullies or the leaders. It is possible that the other 80% go along because they don't want to stand out, and they might be the one victimized, you see. So they participate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the
I
difference.
feel bad for the rest of the kids that aren't part of this gang. They would I would say, probably 85 or 90% of the kids are reasonable and want to learn. But there's this group, this gang of boys. And that's exactly what it is. It's very few girls that this happens with, and the statistics, I mean, when I talked to my VAPA team about it, he had students that were acting like this, that, they are ending up in jail. It's just, how do we, this is right when the trajectory is starting. What can I do to stop it? It's right when it's starting in middle school. Is there anything I can do? What do you think, Dave? What can we do to help?
Well, unfortunately, a rite of passage in the way that we're talking about it socially requires a controlling authority, whether it's the society itself, it's the stigma within the society, it's the makeup of all the institutions within the society that are reinforcing each other, so that this is an unquestionable way for the young people to go. They don't even question it, they follow. And that has all broken down. Our institutions are all at war with one another, and they don't reinforce a single vision of the way forward for our culture. And so you, as a lone teacher, well, you're not going to be able to do that. You can't impose that on anybody. And plus, nobody can impose a hero's journey on anybody. You can kick them out of the nest, but you can't make them take a journey. They have to be willing to do that on their own. And if they're not acculturated to it, then they're going to kick and fight and scream. But what you can do is obviously be true to your own values. As I look back on my life, there were so many guides and helpers that showed up too soon. And I don't know if you have that sense of people that spoke to you and tried to help you, and it just bounced off your force field because you weren't ready yet. But later on in life, and this is what happened to me, when I finally started taking the journey, those voices came back to me, and I was like, oh, now I understand what they were trying to tell me, but I couldn't get it back then. To be one of those voices that shows up too soon for some of these kids is going to be the reinforcement they need when they're ready. That is going to be coming from the inside out as new helpers are showing up from the outside in. And that's the best gift that you can do, is to be consistent with what you believe and to live it to the best of your ability, but also continue to lock your door and to do the things that you need to do, right, in order to be safe and in order to try to do the best you can for the 85% of the kids who really want to be there. So it's really all you can do. And when we say that the answer is Jesus, we have to understand it's not Jesus as a theological concept. It's not Jesus as this, this figurehead of a religion. Jesus gave us the way. And his way was a concrete way of doing exactly what we're talking about. Jesus' way is a hero's journey. It's a rite of passage. It is the journey down to meet God so that we can come back up on the other side. Jesus is powerful because he's giving us a way to follow that will take us exactly where we need to go as human beings. And unfortunately, what the church has pretty efficiently done is remove Jesus from the way. And that takes all the power out of what we're talking about here. And so the original followers of Jesus called themselves followers of the way. They understood that the way was what took them to the Father, and Jesus was the way. And so they followed Jesus. But if we're not following the way of Jesus, then there's no power there either. So it's really important that we understand that it is this path that takes us someplace if we're willing to really let it do its number on us.
Can I offer something maybe to Sandy? Sandy, I haven't heard all of the ins and outs of the challenges you have with these boys. But what you reminded me of, especially when you focused on middle school aged boys, I wondered if somehow, in part of my spiritual travels, I've followed John Eldridge and Morgan Schneider and Ransomed Heart Ministries. They're all based in Colorado. And he is a big one on male rites of passage. And a lot of his ministry work is connected to serving men of different age groups. Now, whether his model that he uses, it's more of a taking young men, but it may be men that are much older than middle school age, but taking at least adolescent aged boys together with guides and mentors out in a wilderness area and putting them, kind of in a team building situation where they are tasked with finding their way and given responsibility and trying to grow them up along with spiritual principles of team building, helping each other out. They probably pull maybe more than the school system would sanction, or approve of, but more of that Jesus focus into things. But I wonder if you'd benefit, or the school would benefit, by talking to some of their staff and see how that might be able to be adapted to offering something to these middle school age boys. I don't know. It's just a thought. It might be way too far out there for the school system to deal with. But
Well,
Well,
notice
they're
what,
offering this great training that we're doing in mindfulness right now. And I love the training that we're doing. But for them to actually get specific about something like gender, I just think that's where lawyers start coming in, and they're just not going to do it. Their hands are tied pretty much, I think. And I'll tell you one thing though, you guys, what has really changed and what I've seen, and what I think are probably my biggest problem, is that when I have a problem with a student and I contact home doesn't back the school up. If a parent comes in and I say the student did this, and the parent says to the student, this is one thing that my mentor teacher told me today, and the student said, oh, I didn't do that. The parent's just like, believes the student, which when I grew up, my parents were like, if the school calls me in, they're going to believe the school. My dad told me the school was in place of him. When he sent me to school, that was in place of him. So in a way, it's like the way kids are today. It sounds harsh, but my dad said he was going to believe the school if I came home. And I was being a rebellious teenager at the time that he told me this. I wasn't 12 or 13, I was being about 14 and starting to get rebellious. But I think he was really right. I mean, so that's where really, more than anything, is where we're cut off. What's the principal going to do when you call the parents in and they won't do anything? Except for they all want to turn it around and point a finger at the school, at anybody but themselves.
Yeah, that is such a
right
hard thing. Yeah, it's been flipped on its head.
so the breakdown occurs right from the families.
Right.
But our institutions aren't, they become more and more powerless in this fight. Notice what Judy was talking about in terms of that solution. It is a hero's journey. It is a ritualized hero's journey that these leaders are taking these boys on out into the wilderness, separation, to do team building, transitional work, and then to reincorporate them back again. But you need a controlling authority to make that happen. And for these kids, the parents are probably the ones who are dragging them kicking and screaming to these camps, is probably what's happening, but there is some authority in the child's life that is compelling them to be a part of this. Now, whether they actually learn anything is up to them. Whether this transforms them at all is up to them, but they have at least the shape of the journey being laid out for them. But for a teacher like Sandy, that's not available to you in really any way, shape, or form to do this, except to lead those who are willing to be led, and then keep preaching the gospel there, dear, in terms of the way, and hopefully it will ring in their heads when the time is right. But more than anything else, Sandy, this is your journey.
I know.
Yes, the task is to teach these kids, but remember the task within the task. What opens up to you about what's really going on in your life as you try to do what you're doing is really what you're going to take away from this. And that part is eternal. So keep your focus on that too.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So
And here
Just
we are.
having fun running around California, guys, and teaching art. I mean, what could be better than this? It sounds like to me, it sounds like it should be a Hallmark card. It would be a Hallmark card if it was only through 5 or 6, it would be a Hallmark card.
Right.
Sandy, I would
Yeah,
I would
then it
also
probably
say,
wouldn't be a hero's journey either. Kathy, I'm
I
sorry,
was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say to
That's see,
Sandy,
that's why I said.
I was just gonna offer up to you also, Sandy, that you might be the one that they're gonna be thinking about when they're grown up. Your little voices are gonna come back to them. Now, that doesn't help you today. You're making the sacrifice today, but your voice might be the one that comes back to them when they're, 30 or 40 years old, saying, I
Yeah.
had this art teacher that she was really, nice, and boy, we were really hard on her, and they're gonna probably have some lessons about that they'll think about. So maybe it'll come back at that point.
And
But even
Dave,
more
Why were we so
importantly,
hard on her?
consistently being that voice for all of us is what
Mhm.
our hero journey is all about.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter about the outcome of the task that we were doing on the surface. It matters what we are doing underneath that.
Mhm.
That's what's taking us where we really need to go. All right,
Mhm.
we cut off William. William, you get the last word before our prayer out, if you have anything still.
Well, I think Kathy nailed it. I was going to say,
Like
you know,
that.
just planting seeds, like that's all we can do basically.
Yeah.
And when those seeds germinate, if they germinate, like that's in God's hands. And all
Mhm.
you have to do is keep sowing your seeds, and that's it.
Oh, the sow seeds.
I'm a
Yeah.
farmer. I'm in rural California, dude.
Lindy, what were you saying, Lindy?
Well, what keeps coming to my mind is something you said earlier about us co-creating with God. And I do believe so much in the power of your prayers for the people that God has put you to influence. And you might not be able to change their behavior, but you can speak in your prayer life into those lives that are meaningful and you're charged with. And I do believe you're there for a reason. And I think that co-creating is something that is active that you can actually do on their behalf. And you may never see it, but
Right.
that's what kept coming back to me. when
Kind
I
of
was
like being a sponsor, huh? When you
Yeah.
when you go to those meetings where they have all the newbies that they bring the vans and, and you pick up a couple spots there.
That's
It's
right.
kind of like that. I look at it like that.
What I like about what Judy said, she said, I want to try to bring this back into a scenario that actually I'm living in my life right now. And that's what we all need to do. Think about in terms of that. Just thinking about Tony. Tony has moved to Santa Fe. And at first it was really tough for him and he didn't like it. And maybe there's still issues that he doesn't like. But also he's moving into photography. He's moving into other areas in his new desert home. And you can see that he's on this hero's journey right now, and it's doing its work in him. And so many of you, Julie, you've been through the ringer between Florida and Tennessee. Those of you who have gone on these journeys, Lindy's whole life is a journey for the last 20 years, from the time of her, especially her son's accident. And think about the things that you're going through. Frank is going through a major transition right now, and so there's so many of us that if you think about your lives this way, you're going to see how it applies. And that's going to give a shape and meaning to the journey that can change everything about the way that you experience it and accept it. And so that's the power here. So keep doing the Judy thing and relating it to where you are right now. See how the parallels occur so that you can use that shape to help strengthen your way.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we
Dave,
better stop here. I'm sorry, go ahead, Judy, real quick.
Well,
Who was it?
Dave, can you hear me?
Yeah, real quick, buddy, because
Okay,
we're
yeah,
over time.
you hadn't said, when I found something in the companion to Falling Upward, read it. I'd like to just really quickly, and I think it ties into what you said to Sandy about her hero's journey
Okay.
with her students and her teaching. It says, how would you describe between your current life situation and what Father Richard calls actual life? Do you have the sense that there's a deeper movement between the surface of your everyday tasks? Can you describe what Dr. Richard calls, what are you doing when you're doing what you're doing? I felt that just kind of really hit home to your experience.
There it is. We are all geniuses. We're thinking along the same lines as the companion to the book is thinking. So we are doing well. Okay, Scott, go ahead and close it down.
Father God, we're so grateful you're here, and we're grateful we all get to meet together and share our stories and raise our questions and get some questions answered. It's a good time that we have, Lord, in fellowship. And as we go about our heroes' journeys, some of us conscious that we're in it and some of us unconscious that we're in a hero's journey, help us to recognize the value of the journey, taking it on instead of avoiding it. Lord, help us to grow and learn and expand and just get our minds right in accordance with your thinking and the way you like things done, Lord. We appreciate the fact that you love us and you care for us and you inspire us and direct us and animate us. Lord, we're just so grateful for everything. We just want to say our thank yous and give our gratitude. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Y'all are awesome. This was another great discussion. Thanks so much. Don't forget it's Mother's Day on Sunday. So if you can be with us, we're going to have a special Mother's Day gathering at the Effect. If not, you can stream it. You can always do that. So yeah. So hopefully we'll see you on Sunday one way or another. All right.
Okay. All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Happy Mother's
Bye,
Day,
Sandy.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye, Sandy.
See you. Bye, Sandy.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Jordana.
Adieu. Adieu. Adieu.
Good night.
Sherry, you're
Sherry.
I
there.
knew you were
Hi,
gonna say, are you
Sherry.
there, Sherry?
There she is.
There's Sherry. There's
Hi,
Sherry.
guys.
All
Bye,
right.
See you
Sherry.
later.
And
Bye-bye.
Jordana and Linda and John, if he's even there. See you guys soon. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, Linda.
Bye.